this is remarkable. First, we find out that Susan Rice is not going to keep her schedule and purportedly wants to have a weekend testimony date, but yet the word still is that she's going to appear at some point, again, a date unnamed, before the Senate Intelligence Committee. What do you make of all of this?
Well, this tells me that lawyers have gotten involved. Lawyers have probably told her to clam up, wait for a subpoena. When you get a subpoena, it's time to play let's make a deal without Monty Hall, because she's in legal jeopardy. If it's true, all of the evidence that has been uncovered about her unmasking, there's three potential crimes here. It's a crime to lie in your request to unmask. There's only one reason you can cite it's national security. If the document on its face shows no national security concerns, then you've lied. It's also a crime to use your public office, her office, for a corrupt purpose, and that would be to lie. And a third crime is, as we all know, it's a crime to unmask and leak a name to the media like Michael Flynn. So at least one crime was committed here and likely many more.
Yeah, that one crime certainly involves Michael Flynn because there is, as Sherlock Holmes would say, no other possibility other than the fact that his name was leaked.
Right. And it'll be interesting to see if they get to the bottom of it. I have a feeling that they will eventually be able to determine the number of people who had access to Flynn's name and then whittle that list down to the individual who leaked it. We'll wait and see.
And encouraging in that regard is the fact that we're now learning, Fox News has learned that the number of individuals involved in the unmasking, we're now told, is widening. Therefore, we're getting a better idea of exactly who was involved, or we wouldn't know even that.
Yeah, it's not just Samantha Power and Susan Rice, but John Brennan as well. And we're led to believe that there are even more individuals. Right. Usually it's one or two who will ask for national security reasons to unmask the name of an American who is caught up in incidental collection. This many people, it does make you wonder, is it true that the Obama administration in the last year in office was undertaking a concerted effort to hurt the Donald Trump campaign and then the presidency of Donald Trump?
In widening the distribution of raw intelligence, they assured that there would be leaks because just of the vastly greater number of people that heretofore had not been permitted to be aware of those names. They have achieved that purpose, certainly. Now, in terms of the unmasking itself, this gets to be very serious. These are serious crimes for which there will be accountability if the names are actually learned and proved.
That's correct. And others have been charged with leaking not just classified information, but the names of Americans who have been caught up in incidental collection. And I would imagine that once they determine who did it here, they're going to be indicted. Now, is it going to be a member of the administration? It would have to be, because they're the only ones who had access, top administration officials, to the intelligence community that actually does the collection.
As we look forward to the possibilities, and I realize the possibilities are, well, many, but is it your sense that executive privilege can be asserted here that would serve as an effective barrier against any further inquiry on the part of these committees?
No, and I don't think there's any motivation to invoke executive privilege. Only the president can actually invoke it. And you have a new president who wants to accomplish just the opposite, to uncover this information. And indeed, it was the White House and the White House counsel's office that found out that all of this unmasking was taking place. They did their own investigation, and they said, wait a minute, what's going on here? They notified Congress, and here we are.
And the Trump administration may have its day, after all, against those who had acted directly against their interests.
As they should. It's not just a crime against the names revealed in the administration. It's a crime against the people. This is not something that should ever be done. The surveillance, unmasking of collected names of Americans, that is hypersensitive and private information.
Greg Jarrett, as always, thanks so much.
Sure.
Appreciate it. Greg Jarrett. We're coming right back. Much more straight.
She's in legal jeopardy. Here's why. Publicly, she said, I don't know anything about electronic surveillance, unmasking, and incidental collection. Well, it turns out she wasn't telling the truth. National Security Council investigated and found on dozens of occasions she requested the unmasking of Trump transition officials, and not for matters related to national security, but purely politics. So there's 3 potential felonies here that apply to her. It's a crime to lie in your unmasking request, claiming it's national security when in fact it's politics. It's a crime to use your government office for political purposes. And finally, if she is the one who leaked Michael Flynn's name, it's a felony to unmask somebody and leak that unmasking.
For her to know it, for it to be taken to the White House in a form which allowed her to know who the Americans were, and that time when, oh, by the way, they happened to be the opposition ticket, and then they happened to be the transition team of the opposition party, this just, frankly, is an extraordinarily dangerous situation, because now you have the entire, this is like some third world dictatorship. You have the power of the federal government looking into what the opposition is doing in a way which, as I pointed out earlier, all of Watergate involved one physical break-in one time. This apparently involves electronic break-ins over months.
It wasn't just that she went out and kind of said, listen, let's just keep this really low key. They may or may not have given up the weapons. She made this out like it was a major Obama foreign policy achievement. Susan Rice has a history of being incredibly dishonest and doing things for political purposes. People forget the Rwandan the incident Rwanda, the genocide. When she was on Bill Clinton's National Security Council, there were 8,000 people being hacked to death a day. And Susan Rice is on record, multiple witnesses, is saying, we can't call this a genocide because it may impact the midterm elections.
The House Intel Committee this month. The closed-door testimony, part of the investigation into Russia's influence on the U.S. election. Republican lawmakers also trying to find out whether Rice played a role in unmasking members of the Trump campaign. Joining me now is Pete Hoekstra, former House Intel Committee chairman. Pete, always good to see you. Thanks for being here this morning, sir.
Yes.
All right, so what do you expect will come out of this? Again, reiterating that this will not be public. This will be a closed door.
This is an absolutely critical hearing for the House Intelligence Committee. You know, there have been lots of issues raised about what the National Security Agency, how much have they been listening into Americans? You know, they're not supposed to listen to Americans. There's foreign intelligence. That's what the NSA does. They're not supposed to target or capture American conversations. Sometimes they do. And so, you know, if they get their act together, they get the right information, they find out how many times Susan Rice unmasked individuals, who these individuals were, what the topics were. But they need that information before the hearing. They're not going to get it at the hearing. They need the information before so they can have the right questions.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? You're saying the preparation for this is so key as far as the questioning is concerned. What can they do beforehand to actually get answers from this?
What they can get is, you know, the intelligence community should be able to provide them, okay, here are the number of times that, you know, in the last half of 2016, Susan Rice asked for unmasking. These were the individuals that were unmasked. This is the content of the conversations. The Intelligence Committee ought to be able to see the actual conversations that Susan Rice unmasked, because the charges here and the concerns are that the White House and Susan Rice in particular were unmasking conversations that did not deal with national security, but that they dealt with political issues, and that we do know that some of these individuals that were unmasked, that these names were leaked into the press. So, you know, there's all kinds of issues, but you're only going to get to the bottom of it if you have that information before the hearing so that you know exactly what you want to question Susan Rice about.
How optimistic are you that they'll be able to get that and ask the right question to lead to the answers that we have not yet gotten?
You should be very optimistic. I mean, number one, it is the responsibility of these agencies to turn that information over to the intelligence committees when they request that information. There's no executive privilege or anything like that. This is what an intelligence committee is supposed to do. You also should have individuals who are friendly to the House Intelligence Committee, because the executive branch and the House Intelligence Committee, they're controlled by the same political party. But regardless of what political party is controlled and those types of things, this information, Congress has every right to ask for it, and the executive branch has every responsibility to provide it to them in the fullest extent in a timely manner.
And the fact that we have learned that this will be a closed-door hearing, meaning it will not be public, and the American people will not be able to witness this, how much does that change things?
It changes the dynamic considerably. What it does do is it leads probably to a more bipartisan hearing and those types of things. But, it's going to be hard. And I just want to make one other point back to your last question. Remember, Senator Graham, Senator Rand Paul, they've asked the questions, have we, during the last presidential campaign, were we tracked? Were we monitored? Were we unmasked? And the intelligence community has been unwilling to provide them with those answers. And so, this may not be an easy job for the House Intelligence Committee to get to the bottom of it, because for some reason it appears the intelligence community has not been fully cooperative.
Susan Rice has hinted previously that she is getting so much attention because of race and sexism. Is there anything to that, Pete?
I don't think so. I think that's total nonsense. This whole issue of the NSA monitoring Americans, this has been festering for 10 to 12 years. A number of senators and members of the House, Senator Ron Wyden, a couple of years ago famously asked the director of the National Intelligence, James Clapper, is there a huge database of of Americans being monitored by the NSA? And the director of national intelligence came back and said, no, there's not. It was later revealed that there was. So, no, this has been an ongoing issue, regardless of who has been in various positions. This is something that Congress has been very aggressively pursuing with everyone in the intelligence community that touches this issue.
And we're going to have to leave it there, Pete. But at the end of all this, will someone be held accountable?
You sure hope so. I mean, there's possibility here that crimes were committed, but most importantly, the intelligence community will be held accountable, whether it broke the rules. If it did not break the rules, they'll probably go ahead with the same latitude that they've had today. If they have broken the rules, you can bet that Congress will come back and limit their ability to track conversations internationally.
All right. Pete Hoekstra, thanks for joining us this morning.
Always good to be with you. Thank you.
All right. That all happening this week. All right. House Republicans scoring a pair of victories, making good on President Trump's promise to crack down on illegal immigration. Now it's the Senate's turn, where things are far from certain. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton weighs in as we look ahead on Sunday Morning Futures.
During the last presidential campaign, were we tracked? Were we monitored? Were we unmasked? And the intelligence community has been unwilling to provide them with those answers. And so, this may not be an easy job for the House Intelligence Committee to get to the bottom of it, because for some reason it appears the intelligence community has not been fully cooperative.
Susan Rice has hinted previously that she is getting so much attention because of race and sexism. Is there anything to that, Pete?
I don't think so. I think that's total nonsense. This whole issue of the NSA monitoring Americans, this has been festering for 10 to 12 years. A number of senators and members of the House, Senator Ron Wyden, a couple of years ago famously asked the director of the National Intelligence, James Clapper, is there a huge database of Americans being monitored by the NSA? And should have individuals who are friendly to the House Intelligence Committee, because the executive branch and the House Intelligence Committee, they're controlled by the same political party. But regardless of what political party is control and those types of things, this information, Congress has every right to ask for it, and the executive branch has every responsibility to provide it to them in the fullest extent in a timely manner.
And the fact that we have learned that this will be a closed-door hearing, meaning it will not be public, when the American people will not be able to witness this, how much does that change things?
It changes the dynamic considerably. What it does do is it leads probably to a more bipartisan hearing and those types of things. But, it's going to be hard. And I just want to make one other point back to your last question. Remember, Senator Graham, Senator Rand Paul, they've asked the questions, have we, Susan Rice, unmasked? Because the charges here and the concerns are that the White House and Susan Rice in particular were unmasking conversations that did not deal with national security, but that they dealt with political issues, and that we do know that some of these individuals that were unmasked, that these names were leaked into the press. So, there's all kinds of issues, but you're only going to get to the bottom of it if you have that information before the hearing so that you know exactly what you want to question Susan Rice about.
How optimistic are you that they'll be able to get that and ask the right question to lead to the answers that we have not yet gotten?
You should be very optimistic. I mean, number one, it is the responsibility of these agencies to turn that information over to the intelligence committees when they request that information. There's no executive privilege or anything like that. This is what an intelligence committee is supposed to do. You also, sometimes they do. And so, if they get their act together, they get the right information, they find out how many times Susan Rice unmasked individuals, who these individuals were, what the topics were. But they need that information before the hearing. They're not going to get it at the hearing. They need the information before so they can have the right questions.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? You're saying the preparation for this is so key as far as the questioning is concerned. What can they do beforehand to actually get answers from this?
What they can get is, the intelligence community should be able to provide them, okay, here are the number of times that, in the last half of 2016, Susan Rice asked for unmasking. These were the individuals that were unmasked. This is the content of the conversations. The intelligence committee ought to be able to see the actual conversations that...
Former National Security Advisor Susan Rice agreeing to testify before the House Intel Committee this month. The closed-door testimony, part of the investigation into Russia's influence on the U.S. election. Republican lawmakers also trying to find out whether Rice played a role in unmasking members of the Trump campaign. Joining me now is Pete Hoekstra, former House Intel Committee chairman. Pete, always good to see you. Thanks for being here this morning, sir.
Yes.
All right. So what do you expect will come out of this? Again, reiterating that this will not be public. This will be a closed door.
This is an absolutely critical hearing for the House Intelligence Committee. There have been lots of issues raised about what the National Security Agency, how much have they been listening into Americans? They're not supposed to listen to Americans. There's foreign intelligence. That's what the NSA does. They're not supposed to target or capture American conversations.
Earlier today on Fox and Friends, there will be a major hearing in about a week that features National Security Advisor Susan Rice. She will testify before the House Intelligence Committee as part of its investigation into this Russia matter. And Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan sits on the House Judiciary and Oversight Committee. Sir, good morning to you, and thank you for coming back here. Wow. This could be something, or it could be nothing.
Yeah.
What do you want to know?
Did you unmask names, and if so, why? I mean, remember, Bill, there's a finite number of people in the Obama administration who had the ability to unmask these names. Some of those people who had that ability are the very same people who were not square with the American public in the aftermath of the Benghazi tragedy. People like Ben Rhodes, people like Susan Rice. So when she comes in front of that committee, you need to ask her that simple, did you do that? And if so, what was the motivation? That's what we need to find out.
So
That's what the American
the
people
reason
wanna
why
know.
this is important is because there are those on the Trump team that think this team was spying on them.
Yeah, you get the
Is that true?
We don't know. All I know is Susan Rice misled the American people after Benghazi. 5 times she went on major networks and told the American people something that she knew was not accurate. We have the evidence that I sat on that committee for 2.5 years. So this same individual has the ability to unmask names. It's been alleged that she's done that. Let's understand what happened here. Did she do it? And if so, what was the motivation and how did it all unfold?
How do you figure
Those are critical questions.
Is this the venue to get that answer?
I would prefer it be public, frankly, because this is going to be in the Intel Committee. It's going to be in a closed-door hearing. I'd prefer it be public. Maybe at some point it could be. I guess it depends on what they learn there. But again, we need to keep all this in context. There's been all this focus on this Russian matter, and appropriately so. I get that. But understand, Susan Rice, Loretta Lynch, Jim Comey. Jim Comey testified a few weeks ago under oath that at the direction of the United States Attorney General, he, the FBI director, misled the American people when he called the Clinton investigation a matter. We should be having hearings in the House Judiciary Committee on that very subject, asking him some key questions. We learned this week that James Comey put classified information in some of these memos. Maybe there's some reason why he found wasn't going to prosecute Secretary Clinton, because he was doing the same thing. I'd like to ask him some of those kind of questions too. So this whole area, I think we need to keep it in the larger context.
Also on Susan Rice, in this larger context of what you were saying?
Yes, exactly. That's
larger
part
context of what?
The larger, there's been all this focus on President Trump and this matter. And I get that. That's important, what we learned this week from Donald Trump Jr. But let's remember, the American people want to get the truth on all these issues, on what Susan Rice may or may not have done. We know what James Comey did because he testified to it. And then we also know he leaked a memo through a friend to the New York Times with the stated objective of creating momentum to get a special counsel. And, of course, not just any special counsel, but his good friend, his predecessor, his mentor, Bob Mueller. So I think all this needs to be looked at so that the American public can get the truth on the entire situation.
Would Susan Rice know how this Russian lawyer was allowed into the country?
I don't know. She got this special immigration parole status. She was here after that had expired, so I don't know that. But she may. And again, that's a great question to ask her as well.
Jim Jordan, thank you for your time.
You bet.
Hearings in about a week. Talk to you before then. Thank you. From the Hill today.
I believe Susan Rice abused this system, and she did it for political purposes. She needs to be brought in and questioned under oath.
You believe that, but none of us here, including Senator, with all due respect, know that. So let's just be very careful here.
Ask her under oath.
And I'm not defending Susan Rice. I'm not at all.
Ask her whether President Obama ordered this or whether he knew about it. That is a big deal if the outgoing administration was actually literally sifting through things. And part of his administration already said we were going to scatter, we were going to get as much information, we were going to scatter it out there publicly to try to harm the Trump administration. This was a witch hunt that began with the Obama administration. Sour grapes on the way out the door.
The gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the families of the victims, it's been 8 months. And I know that there are those who have said that's a long time ago. But the good news is there is no statute of limitations when it comes to finding out the truth, particularly for those who have served and sacrificed and died under our flags. So, Mr. Hicks, let's find out the truth. The President of Libya responded to the attack and labeled it an attack by Islamic extremists, possibly with terror links, correct?
Yes, sir.
So hours after our ambassador and 3 others are killed in Benghazi, the President of Libya says it was an attack with possible terror links, correct?
Yes, sir. That's what I recall.
Did the President of Libya ever mention a spontaneous protest related to a video?
No, sir.
When Ambassador Stevens talked to you, perhaps minutes before he died, as a dying declaration, what precisely did he say to you?
He said, Greg, we're under attack.
Would a highly decorated career diplomat have told you or Washington had there been a demonstration outside his facility that day?
Yes, sir, he would have.
Did he mention one word about a protest or a demonstration?
No, sir, he did not.
So fast forward, Mr. Hicks, to the Sunday talk shows and Ambassador Susan Rice. She blamed this attack on a video. In fact, she did it 5 different times. What was your reaction to that?
I was stunned. My jaw dropped, and I was embarrassed.
Did she talk to you before she went on the 5 Sunday talk shows?
No, sir.
You were the highest-ranking official in Libya at the time, correct?
Yes, sir.
And she did not bother to have a conversation with you before she went on national television?
No, sir.
So Ambassador Rice directly contradicts the evidence on the ground in Libya. She directly contradicts the president of Libya. She directly contradicts the last statement uttered by Ambassador Stevens. Mr. Hicks, who is Beth Jones?
Beth Jones is the Acting Assistant Secretary for Near Eastern Affairs at the State Department.
I want to read an excerpt from an email she sent, and you were copied on it. And by the way, Mr. Chairman, for our colleagues who like to trumpet bipartisanship, this would be a wonderful opportunity to demonstrate it. Some of these emails, even though they're not classified, have not been released, Mr. Chairman, including the one that I'm going to read from. So for my colleagues who trumpet bipartisanship, this would be a wonderful time to prove it. This is from Ms. Jones to you, to counsel for Hillary Clinton, to Victoria Nuland, to Mr. Kennedy, near as I can tell, to almost everyone in the State Department, and I'm going to read from it. I spoke to the Libyan ambassador and emphasized the importance of Libyan leaders continuing to make strong statements. By the way, Mr. Hicks, this email was sent on September the 12th, the day after Benghazi, and several days before Ambassador Rice's television appearance. And I'll continue. When he said his government suspected that former Gaddafi regime elements carried out the attacks, I told him that the group that conducted the attacks, Ansar al-Sharia, is affiliated with Islamic terrorists. Let me say that again, Mr. Hicks. She told him, the State Department, on September the 12th, days before our ambassador went on national television, is telling the ambassador to Libya, the group that conducted the attacks, Ansar al-Sharia, is affiliated with Islamic terrorists. Mr. Hicks, I want to know 2 things. Number one, why in the world would Susan Rice go on 5 Sunday talk shows and perpetuate a demonstrably false narrative? And secondarily, what impact did it have on the ground in Benghazi, the fact that she contradicted the president of Libya?
As to the first question, I cannot provide an answer, but perhaps you should ask Ambassador Rice.
I would love the opportunity to do just that.
As to the second question, at the time, we were trying to get the FBI to Benghazi to begin its investigation. And that talk show actually provided an opportunity to make that happen. Afterwards, we encountered bureaucratic resistance for a long period from the Libyans. The Libyan government at this time is not very deep. President, Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Ministers, ministers, all capable people, some vice ministers as well. And it took us an additional see, my math's not very fast these days, maybe 18 days to get the FBI team to Benghazi.
So the crime scene was unsecured for 18 days?
Yes, sir.
Witnesses were not interviewed?
If the gentleman would please finish up, we're going to try and move along.
Yes, I will move on. We will finish this if there is a second round. Thank you, Mr. Hicks.
Thank you. For all individuals, to the extent that
Well, she has no regrets. That's what National Security Advisor Susan Rice now says about the talking points she delivered on 5 different Sunday morning talk shows right after the Benghazi attack. Here's what she said in September of 2012.
Information, the best information and the best assessment we have today is that, in fact, this was not a pre-planned, premeditated attack. That what happened initially was that it was a spontaneous reaction to what had just transpired in Cairo as a consequence of the video, that people gathered outside the embassy, and then it grew very violent. Those with extremist ties joined the fray and came with heavy weapons, which unfortunately are quite common in post-revolutionary Libya, and that then spun out of control. But we don't see at this point signs that this was a coordinated, planned, premeditated attack.
And now, after more than a year of fierce criticism, Rice still standing by her remarks.
Do you have any regrets?
David, no. Because what I said to you that morning and what I did in every day since was to share the best information that we had at the time. The information I provided, which I explained to you, was what we had at the moment. It could change. I commented that this was based on what we knew on that morning, was provided to me and my colleagues, and indeed to Congress, by the intelligence community. And that's been well validated in many different ways since.
Congressman Trey Gowdy joins us. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. How are you?
Very well. Ambassador Rice, now National Security Advisor, of course, says that was the best information available when she went on those talk shows in September 2012. Is that true?
No, there is no evidence to support that false narrative of a video, not a scintilla of evidence. All of the evidence pointed exactly to what she claimed it wasn't, a pre-planned, coordinated attack. So she was fabulously wrong when she said it the first time, and stunningly arrogant in her refusal to express any regret for lying to our fellow citizens.
So what happens? Nothing, right? I mean, that's it.
Well, there are a couple of things that I hope can happen. I would love the chance to ask follow-up questions of Susan Rice, because David Gregory apparently did not avail himself of that opportunity. Greta, I just listened to the clip. I get tougher questions in the Bojangles drive-thru than he asked her. There's no regret about lying to your fellow citizens. No regret about the fact that in 18 months not a single solitary person's been brought to justice. No regret for misleading the families and the loved ones of those 4 murdered Americans. I can certainly help her if she is struggling to come up with an area of regret. Who did she talk to before she went on the Sunday talk shows? Did she call Hillary Clinton? Did she call Gregory Hicks in Libya? Did she do any due diligence at all?
Why do you think that she said that on that day? I mean, she says it was the best information. You say that that's not true. What was the motive? I still don't get the motive for coming up with the silly video story. What was the point of that one?
Well, I think the most plausible explanation is we can either tell the truth, which undercuts the narrative that the president's been engaged in during the campaign. Remember, we were in the midst of a campaign. Al-Qaeda's on the run and Osama bin Laden is dead. Well, apparently Al-Qaeda was not on the run. They were at the front door of our facility in Benghazi getting ready to kill our ambassador and burn it down. So she can either tell the truth or she can blame it on a video for which there was no evidence whatsoever, and she opted to protect her career and parrot the talking points that were provided to her by the White House.
You know what I regret is that, and this is what I would like to do, is I believe that in Washington, when you don't want to say something, you just stamp it classified, and then nobody gets to see it for 10, 20, 30, 50 years, whatever. I would like a really, fair analysis about whether documents associated with this in the possession of the administration should be classified, or whether the American people ought to be able to see them. I think there's a gross overclassification in this country, and I would bet that a lot of those documents would give us a lot of straight information on what went down.
Well, you're right. A lot of the classified documents are classified to protect political careers, not to protect national interests. But I think it also bears on another point. There are 4 committees that have been looking into this for 18 months. And to my knowledge, not a single one has had the opportunity to ask the follow-up questions that David Gregory failed to ask on Sunday. It may be time to put our efforts together with a select committee with subpoena power, because as you know, I can't subpoena anyone. I can't subpoena the greeter at Walmart. I have no subpoena power. The committee chairman and the speaker do. And I'm about ready to ask Ms. Rice some questions under oath
Not David Gregory type questions about what's your favorite color, but real serious questions about why you had so little intellectual curiosity as to question the talking points that you were asked to parrot. Did you ask anybody to prove to you that this was a video? Or did you just go out and parrot it?
Well, if the Speaker does and the Chairman does issue a subpoena, make sure it also includes one for documents and try to get all those documents that are now classified, because I think that they will either corroborate or